Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about the City Lights series. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And this week on the show, we've got our old pals, Landon Palmer and James Paasche. I'm still getting it right?
That's perfect.
Yeah.
That's so good.
So these guys are the programmers of the City Lights series here at at Indiana University, and so this is exciting. This is exciting. Long-running series. You guys have taken it over the past couple of years, and I got to say, it looks like a really great series. I can't wait. So let's talk about City Lights, and before we get started, let's just give a brief overview of the City Lights series, where it comes from, why do we have a City Lights series, and how did you guys get involved?
It's been a series curated by the students in the communication and culture department for a number of years. Landon and I are both PhD students in that department. And for a long time, it was just playing 16 millimeter prints from the David Bradley collection. David Bradley was a film collector, a director, kind of a person in Hollywood back in the day, who donated his entire film collection, a bunch of notes, a bunch of home movies he took of parties with stars and stuff like that, to Indiana University. And so we've curated the series from this amazing collection of mainly 16 millimeter films that he had. And so what we do is we pick from the Bradley collection, and then since before it was, we would project the 16 millimeter prints ourselves and upstairs here in the radio and TV building, or we would get DVDs even, and the quality of the showings and the attendance of the showings was rather hit and miss.
Yeah.
Since the opening of the cinema, John was excited to have this series in there, and what John Vickers has done is we give him a list of films. We kind of whittle them down. We come up with a much larger list. We Landon and I whittle them down, and then we present them to John. And if there's any problems, he's like, let's try a different one or something like that. Mm-hmm. That happens, but not really. He kind of lets us do what we want. Mm-hmm. And then he goes out and tries to find better prints of them because he wants the film experience to be great in there.
They have projected maybe half a dozen things from the actual Bradley collection, and some of them are actually surprisingly good.
Yeah, some of them look great.
Some of them are not. Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
There's a few this time that are 16 millimeters from the collection.
Excellent.
Freaks, and I know Treasure of Sierra Madre are.
Wow, excellent. Oh, before we get into the actual films, I know you guys in the past have had sort of like an overall philosophy of how you chose the films, or at least some guidelines for yourselves. What were those this time?
Okay, so I guess the first semester that we did this, which was last fall, we kind of wanted to look for films that you could, for the most part, only see at the IU Cinema. So films that didn't have a pristine DVD release, stuff like that. Maybe films that weren't necessarily the obvious picks, not like the best film noir, but like maybe a really great film noir that's otherwise overlooked. So we kind of went on with that route, and then the second semester last spring, we went with a lot of lighter fare comedies, musicals. Stuff like The Red Shoes and Young Frankenstein. This time, we don't have any comedies in the fall program, but it's certainly not as emotionally wrenching as last fall's program. But what we want to do here was just to kind of get the best of variety. So unlike the way that we went about it this time last year, we're not really afraid to dig into the canon of the best films, and so we just kind of wanted to give people a great variety of the best kinds of various types of films possible. So like most City Lights programs, this is for the most part one film from each decade. No real overlaps in terms of stars, genres, directors, things like that, in order to exhibit the variety of the Bradley collection. But also so that people have a lot of options and can have a lot of fun.
The next one after that is on September 15th at 3, and that's I heard that you guys had some help scheduling this one. This is The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Yeah, John emailed us and said, hey, we want to show The Treasure of the Sierra Madre because it's one of Werner Herzog's favorite Hollywood films. this is the weekend he's going to be there. Do you mind if we put it under the City Lights rubric? And we're like, heck yeah. It's a great film.
Yeah.
And I think it'll definitely fit the rest of Herzog week too, because of its location shooting and just kind of the film itself being kind of at one with the elements like Werner Herzog seems to be perpetually.
The next one here is one that Jim Naramore specifically pointed out to us and said, I think this is a dynamite film. And when he says that, you know it's something good. Petulia, which, again, I had never heard of this film, but it's directed by Richard Lester, who I love because he directed Hard Day's Night. And it's got Julie Christie, who I think I don't know if I've said it on this podcast, but I think she might be one of the most beautiful women who's ever existed in the history of time. And George C. Scott is in this as well. So I'm there. That's great. But what am I seeing? What is this? Why is it on this list?
Well, Petulia is really interesting for a number of reasons. One is because it's a real departure for Richard Lester. It's not a comedy. It's not at all. It's a very it's kind of a difficult interpersonal. It's a pretty difficult interpersonal drama, but it's hoisted by George C. Scott and Julie Christie. Both of them are at the top of their game. George C. Scott is he's kind of an older businessman type. Kind of he seems like he might have been like a former Madison Avenue guy. Like he used to be hip, but now in the late '60s he's kind of square. And then Julie Christie is kind of like maybe I don't want to say this in a negative way because it's I don't mean it in that way regarding the film, but like a manic pixie dream girl, except like a real one, like somebody who is manic and incredibly endearing and magnetic, but because they're an incredibly complicated person. And so this movie deals with the way that their relationship changes. And Joseph Cotton's in it as well. So actually, I lied when we said that we didn't have two movies with the same star in them. But it was made in 1968, and so it's part of that kind of new Hollywood movement. But it's often overlooked in favor of other films like Easy Rider and things like that. And I think that this movie belongs way up there with those films, especially in terms of the way that it deals with generational differences. It deals with the 60s counterculture. It was filmed in San Francisco, but they planned on filming it before, Haight-Ashbury became a moniker for a certain type of countercultural activity. And so it's interesting that once they start filming, it's a very colorful movie, and it captures Haight-Ashbury in this very particular moment. And even the Grateful Dead are extras in the film towards the end.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things to look forward to in Petulia.
Yeah, I haven't seen this one, so I'm really excited to see it. Landon obviously loves it. So
yeah. So let me ask you this. This sounds like this is something you've wanted up there for a while. Are there films that you just keep bringing up every year, just trying to get them in?
Petulia is one of them. He's been,
and this is finally the year.
It just kind of fit better this semester.
Yeah. It's hard to choose which '60s film you want to show. At least for me, that's one of my favorite decades.
Yeah. Now, you guys generally sort of cover the holidays. So Valentine's Day this last semester, what did you guys show? Holiday, yes. So, generally show like a romantic comedy around then. But around Halloween, you guys show horror movies. Last year, you showed Carrie and
Altered States
back to back. You got kind of a different feel this time.
Yeah.
You're going with Bride of Frankenstein, which I think probably is a pretty cheesy horror film. Maybe not. Maybe in that mix.
It's classic.
Classic.
It's classic.
And the somewhat controversial Freaks.
Yes.
From 1932, which I didn't realize until this moment was pre-code, but now, of course, I realize it must have been pre-code.
Even then, it was heavily censored.
Yes. So talk to me about these films. Why Bride of Frankenstein? Why not Frankenstein? Or why not?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought of it. I think cinematically, just the reveal of the Bride of Frankenstein is one of those moments in cinema that's quoted again and again and again and again. I was watching an episode of The Simpsons recently, and her hair shot up like Elsa Lanchester's. So I think, at least for me, this is one of the ones that I really wanted. It was just kind of remembering that this image and this film has been such a big part of cinematic history, and the ability to see it again on the big screen was huge for me. I've never seen this film on a screen. It's always been television, and to see something so well directed, James Whale, a great director, directed the first Frankenstein and Return for a Bride. It seemed like a no-brainer, really.
Yeah,
no pun intended on that one.
we wanted to have some cross promotion with Tim Burton's Frankenweenie as well.
Oh, so. Good.
No, not at all. Well, I mean, these 30s horror movies are great. I mean, first of all, because they're all, I mean, so many of them are just such great movies that even if some of the scares may have reduced over time, the movies, so many of these movies still remain great. Like if it wasn't these two, we could have put in King Kong and Island of Lost Souls or something like that. Like, and what's great about them is that they're also typically less than 80 minutes.
Yes.
So they make for a really perfect double feature that's not too long. And so Halloween last year was kind of a double feature, but they were two separate feature-length films. We wanted this year to do a double feature proper, and present. I don't know. Ended up presenting two very, very different films about monstrosity.
Yes, and Freaks. We should say what is controversial about it. In a time when makeup and stuff was starting to become a big thing, Todd Browning here just hired actual sort of circus performers, and a lot of them are very strange looking and not really made up at all. So,
and a film that I talked about a while ago, and as a Herzog film as well, even Dwarf Started Small. He has said, this was his version of Freaks, and obviously the career of David Lynch has been greatly influenced by this film as well. Elephant Man, specifically influenced by Freaks.
Yeah, and I mean the controversy of it is interesting because it's if Freaks were released today, the controversy would be that you're exploiting these people.
Exactly.
But the controversy then was we don't want to see these people.
Yeah.
But it's such a strange film. But it's
that's a really strange film. Yeah.
Yes.
It's by far the strangest film we're shown in this series.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if this were billed as the underground film series and they were showing Freaks, it would be like, whatever, no big deal. That's what they do. But you guys showing Freaks, that's a little different.
I think that's the right order too.
Yeah.
Bride of Frankenstein first, Freaks second.
Yeah. Give people a chance to kind of shuffle out if they don't want to see Freaks.
Yeah. I think I think a lot of people have seen Freaks by this point, but it'll be interesting to see if there's people leaving at intermission.
Yeah. So that's on October 27th, Saturday at 3 p.m. The next film listed is one of my top 5, maybe top 2 or 3 favorite films of all time, The Third Man. Directed by Carol Reed, starring Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton. This film is just amazing. I watched this as part of a class like 10, 12 years ago, and I knew nothing about it other than it was assigned, and I sat down to watch it, prepared to be bored, and I was just mesmerized and blown away. This film, I mean, I want to say everything about this film, but, just everything about it, I feel like it's almost essentially perfect. It really is.
Yeah, it's one of those films where the kind of central character or the kind of premise for the whole thing coming together isn't really revealed until quite well into the film.
Yes.
It sounds quite a bit like Moss, but maybe an hour and a half
possibly
less. And the reveal of Orson Welles as Harry Lime is, I think it's one of the best moments in cinema.
I think it's the greatest reveal of all time.
Yeah.
Like, it could not be any better.
I think the reveal in Bride of Frankenstein equals it, and those two things are very similar to me. Like these, I've in watching all these Herzog films with Kinski lately. Every time that he's on screen, he tries to do a reveal, and I think he's stealing that from these kind of movies where just this fresh face appearing that instantly changes the film. and then the kind of iconic ending of the film, the chase through the sewers, is, obviously Christopher Nolan has watched The Third Man.
Yes. And the speech
a little too much, maybe,
that Orson Welles gives. I mean, that's not just like one of the best moments of cinema. That's the best moments in speaking. It's it's just one of the best things that anyone has ever said.
And it's just a perfect movie. Like, there's some movies that I love more than The Third Man, and I love their imperfections or something weird about them. But The Third Man always just felt perfect. Like, it doesn't feel like there's any lulls. I don't know. It's just tightly composed, really well written. Graham Greene is an amazing writer. I've been reading some of his novels lately. And a really, really great writer.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those really, great movies that has never been called overrated.
Yeah.
That nobody's ever said, oh, people love The Third Man too much.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those movies that doesn't require any justification.
It's not like Citizen Kane when it hits the top of those lists, everyone's like, come on. It hit the top of the BFI list, and everyone's like, no, okay.
Well, the Citizen Kane, feels more like vegetables. It's not as enjoyable. Whereas, The Third Man, I don't know. I guess in this analogy would be a really, really good pizza.
Fair enough. Also, we should point out the zither score, which who else would do that? What other film has that where it's more sort of wrong but right?
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
This movie's like good Austrian food.
There we go. Is there such a thing?
And another one with really good. This is one that does have good social commentary. It's shot in. Is it shot in Austria?
Vienna, yeah.
Vienna, right
Vienna.
After the war. Yeah. The buildings that are knocked down in this movie weren't knocked down by the production.
Yeah.
They're just shooting buildings that were knocked down, and uses that, And the next one listed here, November 17th, a film I've never seen, but is one of those that is, kind of held up as one of the greats of this particular genre, Cabaret.
Yeah.
With Liza Minnelli and Joel Grey, who Joel Grey has sort of turned into kind of a cult figure. I don't know if he got that reputation from this film or from other work he's done, but yeah.
I mean, this was the height of his fame for sure. He won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for the film. Liza Minnelli won Best Actress. And you were saying, I think you said Fosse won Best Director for this, right?
I think so. I don't remember.
I believe it was the year that it didn't win Best Picture because The Godfather was that year. But Coppola didn't win Best Picture. He lost to Fosse for Best Director.
Interesting.
And I'm sure he's still really angry about that.
Or Fosse won to Coppola.
That's true. Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
But as far as I honestly don't know the history of musicals or anything like that, and I'm not well versed in it, musicals, but this one I love. There's something about these two performers just being completely unhinged and going for it. And I've recently, when I was growing up, I didn't know much about Liza Minnelli. I knew she was Judy Garland's daughter and she sang a lot. But since being a huge Arrested Development fan and seeing her as Lucille too, and kind of the charisma that she has, and then going back and watching this film and realizing like what a megastar she was, and the kind of investment that people had in her as Judy Garland's daughter, but also as an incredible performer herself. I'm looking forward to seeing it in that theater, not only on the screen, we keep talking about that, but for the sound system. Like the songs and the numbers in there are really, really good.
Yeah. Well, I always say the difference with the IU Cinema is the sound. You'll go to some theaters that have bigger screens. I have a hard time believing you'll find a place with better sound than the IU Cinema.
I agree.
IU Cinema. All right, so there's two more left here. The first one coming on December 1st is Fanny and Alexander, the Ingmar Bergman film. And I've been trying to get some more Bergman in my life lately, so I'm glad this showed up. The last Criterion sale, I bought a couple of Bergman films, so I still haven't watched them yet. So we're going to get to those. But
it's vegetables.
It's probably best not to get too much Bergman in your life at the same time.
Yes, so I might space it out a little bit. One a month maybe. So tell me about Fanny and Alexander.
Well, the Bradley collection does not have too many movies from the 80s. I think pretty much everything in collection stops around 1985 or something like that. But they have Altered States and they have Fanny and Alexander. And I know people who are huge Bergman people. I'm not a huge Bergman person, but I do love certain films by him, this being one of them. What's one thing that's great about this film is that this is kind of his swan song almost, even though he made films after this. He originally intended for this to be his last film. And as one might do late in their life, this film is semi-autobiographical. So it's about his life being raised in Sweden early in the 20th century. Basically, it's certainly not a film about Bergman, but in many ways it is. But it's also our Christmas movie. Take that how you will. But one of the, I felt if we were going to show this film that it would be best to see it in cold weather. It would be best to see it around Christmas time because that's when much of the movie takes place.
Okay.
And what's interesting about this film, especially in terms of what other European directors were doing at the same time, is that this is the theatrical version, which is still very lengthy. It's still over 3 hours. But that's an abbreviated version of the film. The real film itself is around 5 hours, and it was originally broadcast on Swedish television.
Okay.
But Bergman had supervised the making of both versions, and this one is specifically meant for movie theater. So I think it's interesting because I don't really think there's an analog in American filmmaking. I think that at some point these European filmmakers saw a different potential in television than American filmmakers saw, and and then Bergman made a movie that is, at once one movie and at once another movie. Okay. And from what I understand, I've never actually seen the television version, but I think the theatrical version is more focused on the lives of the children.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I love this film so much is that it is centered on children, and it really gets at kind of the fright that children have in their encounters with adults, and also the joy that they have in being with each other, these siblings. It's just one of those movies about kids that does kiddom or that time in your life really, really well, and it doesn't feel condescending towards children at all.
Yeah, it doesn't romanticize childhood or just portray everything as purely innocent.
Yeah, exactly. There's joy and spite and fear and all of these kind of mixture of emotions. The children are like well-formed characters, not just, pipsqueaks.
Yeah, the one thing that I always come away from Bergman films is that I have them, and they're all laid out, and I'm like, I could watch any one of these movies, and then I'm like, but do I want to? And I always find myself backing away from them, despite seeing every single one I've seen. I've loved. Yeah. I've gotten something out of it, and I don't know what that is. Not a lot of directors. Yeah, they're really intense, and obviously his career has spanned such a long period of time, especially in just anything, everything cinema wise, that you could jump around and get a completely different experience from the same person, which I find fascinating. So every time I see a movie from Bergman, I'm just like, is this really the same person? Because it just feels like a completely different experience. It always feels like they're trying something different, but there's still that unique sort of string throughout every movie. There's that touch. They're like, okay, yeah, I can see that a little bit. I don't think I've ever gotten into the 80s portion or even the late 70s portion of the films, but I'm looking forward to it.
This one is, I took my freshman year of undergrad, I took a great world cinema directors, and it was Fellini, Kurosawa, and Bergman. Yeah. And, Fellini and Kurosawa are very pleasurable filmmakers, and Bergman is more cerebral and kind of, I don't know, a little more ponderous maybe.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like those films as much. But then when they showed Fanny and Alexander in that class, I'm like, I now understand. At that age, I understood, this is a great film. Yeah, it's epic.
It's one of those rare last films by a director that is a great introduction to their body of work.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to say that.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, because I've never seen it, but everything else I've seen, like I said, I'm always reluctant to watch it just because they are so intense and because there's so much to chew on that I just pass it up for another movie. Obviously, I've been doing that, and I've been talking about them at length. Yeah. So At this point, I saw it. I read the description. And I was like, oh, who directed that? I looked and I said, I'm there. And then I saw the link to the movie and I said, I don't care. I was like, this is a chance to see a Bergman film at the IU Cinema.
Yeah, I mean, Landon, your point about like seeing it in the winter, I think it's Saturday, December 1st. We're going to be iced or snowed in at that point. I think spending 3 hours in IU Cinema in a warm place with Bergman will be good.
Very cool.
Totally.
The last one here is sort of almost like the original classic movie, really. I mean, it's Carl Theodor Dreyer, renowned filmmaker, The Passion of Joan of Arc. 1928 silent film. This one's going to have piano accompaniment. I tried watching this one time. I got about 10 minutes in. I was like, you know what? It's going to have to be another time. It's going to have to be another time because this one, it doesn't, again, it's early cinema. So, I mean, what can you say about this one?
I guess this is what Third Man is to you, Passion of Joan of Arc is to me.
Okay.
This is one of my favorite movies ever made. And there are a lot of reasons why. I mean, the cinematography is beautiful. The editing is well beyond its time, especially for silent cinema. Yeah. But the performance by Maria Falconetti, it's astounding because what this film does that I think is totally unique to silent cinema is that it shows you how you can kind of key into and identify with like a whole range of emotions that an actress has without you ever hearing their voice. And much of the movie is just a close-up on her. But yet at the same time, you go through everything that she's going through. I've never seen it on big screen, so I'm really excited to see how these close-ups work on the big screen.
Yeah, her film, I mean, you're going to see the pores in her face.
Yeah.
It's going to be pretty amazing. Those close-ups are just so iconic.
And what's interesting about the release of this film is, I mean, it was thought to have been lost for decades and decades until a print was found in an insane asylum in Norway, an abandoned insane asylum in Norway. That was a pretty good print, and then the film got restored, and then it was like this kind of lost piece of history was rediscovered. But that being said, there are no records of what specific piano scores went with the film or anything like that. And so when the film was released on Criterion, I think in the early 2000s, some composer had made a score to it that it's amazing. It's really great. But I've only seen it with that one particular piece of music, which has no real direct relationship with the film itself. So it'll be interesting to watch it live and have another musician do an original score alongside this film.
Yeah. And also I'm noticing that the print from this is coming from the Academy Film Archive, so probably going to be a pretty great print.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's the last film. That's Saturday, December 8th. Any closing thoughts about this particular set of films?
Like a lot of bands, that go out on the road or whatever, and they want to play the stuff they want to play. That's how we started out, and I think we're playing the hits right now. Yeah. And I think that's the way to go with this series. I don't know.
It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get out of here. Thank you, James and Landon, for joining us again.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. And we'll get out of here. I'm Andy.
I'm Jason.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.